Okay. Welcome in, Jenna. Go ahead and find a seat. Is anybody else wandering while I was away? Madison! Hey, girl. Alright, it's 6:05. I think that's a great time to get started. So while Mr. Jপ্ৰভkY is doing his presentation, please keep your microphones down. This will be recorded for YouTube, just this presentation. So make sure that you turn your gestures off. We will permit local text chat, and he may or may not get to a question of yours. Jপ্ৰভkY, do you want to take questions during or just after your presentation?
I'm not sure I'd be able to properly do questions during the presentation. And in order to ensure quality answers, I want to be able to do it afterwards, please.
All right, so hold your questions until afterwards. Cameron, if you're ready, okay? Microphones down, and anytime you're ready, Jপ্ৰভkY.
I want to thank everybody for coming to my presentation of income inequality and labor organization in the United States. My name is JOHNKYBLUE, or John Kentucky Blue, and I have some expertise in this area. I have a bachelor's of science in political science from the University of Kentucky, and these are the issues that I studied whenever I had an independent study opportunity. To get started, I'd like for everybody to think about what their ideal income inequality would be. Typically, when studying this issue, we divide people into 5 groups. The highest income, the next high, which would be the highest 80 to 100%. And then the next highest level would be the 60 to 80. And then the middle would be 40 to 60. Low income would be 20 to 40. And the lowest income would be 0 to 20. Some amount of income inequality is a good thing. It provides motivation and rewards merit. People that work smarter, harder, and longer should make more money. So just think for a minute about what you think how much wealth those income groups each should have. On the presentation, you'll see a study by Duke University. It shows I'm sorry. It shows what the actual distribution is. It shows what Americans think it is, and it shows what they would like it to be. As you can see, the highest 20% has almost all the money. The 60 to 80% group has some, and the 40 to 60 has very little. The bottom 20% and the 20% above it is mostly in debt, actually. But this contrasts to what Americans think it is. Americans think that it's way better than it really is. And this creates a lot of problems when trying to conquer this issue or take it on, because people think that this is fair as it is, or much fairer than it really is. Of course, even compared to what they think it is, what they would like it to be is even more fair. When we measure income inequality, we use what's called a Gini coefficient. Gini was a mathematician from Italy, and what that measures is how far skewed to the right or left, where you put the wealthy people, income or wealth is. The higher the Gini coefficient, the more skewed and the more income inequality there is. Public policy definitely makes a difference. We can see with this graph 4 different countries in Europe. This is comparative politics, by the way. It's a field. And the different public policies of England, France, Germany, and Italy. Most of the countries that are on this graph have very similar Gini coefficients. But the public policies that exist in Germany and France create more equality. They have preferable public policies. This next graph is the evolution of the Gini index in the United States. We can see that things were very unequal in the Great Depression. And this is one of the causes of the Great Depression. When we think about the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we think about it with a lot of kindness. We think about it that way because income inequality was very low. The public policies of Reagan and Bush significantly raised income inequality. These public policies included capital gains tax cuts and payroll tax increases. This set into motion a general income inequality growth pattern afterwards also. There's a field called Econophysics. In Econophysics, people have run computer simulations of transactions. The particular one that is linked in the presentation is a simulation where 100 people are given the same amount of money. The assumption is when they make a trade, one person gets slightly richer and another person gets slightly poorer. When running this simulation over thousands of transactions, what happens is, even though the law of large numbers says that when it's going to be 50-50, you end up with a lot of streaks, and you end up with extreme income inequality or wealth inequality. If you run it without any sort of income tax and redistribution of that money, then a lot of people, most of the 100, end up with zero. If you run it with some amount of that, then you end up with people always having a little bit of money at least. But the major point is that some people go, a very few set of people go on streaks where they do very, very well. We can compare the results of these simulations to reality. And when we do, what we find is that our reality is even worse than these simulations predict. Our public policies today in the United States are insufficient to prevent gross income inequality and wealth inequality. The solution, though, of having taxes and income transfers is very unpopular in the United States. This is due to a lot of propaganda. For example, when Reagan was running for president, he had on TV welfare queens having babies so that they could get more welfare and drive Cadillacs. This example was actually debunked and is not something that actually happened. Even later in the 90s, Clinton signed the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Act. That changed welfare cash payments to limited to 2 years. By limiting it to 2 years, a lot of people had to leave the welfare rolls, and most of them ended up on Social Security. 10% of the population actually that was on welfare actually disappeared. We don't know where they went. They are either being supported by their family or they went into black markets. Many probably are involved in drugs due to the markets created by the drug war. Even recently, we see recent cuts to SNAP from Republicans. The SNAP is what was formerly called food stamps. It's a supplemental nutrition assistance program. And the basic idea is that children should be able to be fed. Again, minimum incomes are a great idea to replace these social programs, but most Americans don't like that idea because of propaganda. There is a resource the poor have in order to increase their wealth, but unfortunately, that resource has been eaten by inflation. As we can see from the graph, minimum wage has increased. That is the nominal. The real is dollars in 2013 dollars. We can see that 1968 was the highest that minimum wage was. Minimum wage also has a lot of propaganda against it. People assume that it's teenagers entering the workforce. The truth of the matter is most minimum wage earners are women and most are adults. There's a lot of inflationary pressures. You'll hear a lot about wage inflation, but more important are inflationary pressures such as scarcity. For example, a scarcity example would be when OPEC turns off the pumps for oil, the price of oil goes up. Another inflationary pressure is rent seeking by the rich. They're doing the exact same thing that they have done before, but they want to have more income from it, and they raise prices. This is possible due to monopolies. Typically, in a free market situation in an ideal world, this would present an opportunity for somebody new to enter into the market. Unfortunately, high capital costs for getting into most of these markets make that impossible. The rich are protected by those capital costs. Another example is increases in the money supply that outpace the growth of the value of things. Overall, wage inflation is not really a thing that I have ever seen in my lifetime. And we must have some amount of wage inflation, or else living standards decrease. Recently, we've seen a lot of people complaining about $15 an hour for fast food workers. I like to use the example of if I owned a hot dog stand and I had a hot dog employee maker. He made 100 hot dogs that we sold every hour. I paid him $10 an hour. My cost for him would be 10 cents an hour, or 10 cents a hot dog, I'm sorry. If I was to give him a raise to $15 an hour, I would only have to raise my prices by 5 cents in order to recoup all of that cost. I wouldn't have to charge $20 a hot dog, which is what a lot of the memes and whatnot on the internet say. Again, wage inflation has not existed in my lifetime. And I think the reason why is because union membership has decreased beyond a level that makes it so that wages rise. Studies show that a 20% unionization rate in any particular industry makes it so that the entire industry gets a raise. We've seen union participation rates fall dramatically pretty much since I was born and slightly before. And if you look at this graph, what's very striking is how close those lines are. It's very clear that they are very closely related. So, labor organizing in the United States has a very dubious history. Before 1937, it was called the Lochner era. In the Lochner era, people were able to organize and able to go on strike, but they weren't recognized by the government as a legitimate non-government organization. And many times the government literally fought the people that were trying to organize. Between 1920 and 1937, over 10,000 people died fighting for the ability to be recognized by government as a legitimate organization. Employers would literally set up machine gun nests and mow down employees, typically minors. And the only reason that we know of this happening is because in their tents they would dig holes so that the machine guns couldn't get into their hole and kill the people in the hole underneath their tent. The government one time, in order to break a strike, tried to fly planes and drop bombs on a mining camp. This was in West Virginia. West Virginia has a lot of mountains, and the planes crashed into the mountains. If you haven't heard of it, there is a battle that was called the Battle of Blair Mountain. That was over a mine strike. Even today, not today, but not too long ago, about 30 years ago, there was Harlan County, USA. A movie was made about a strike. In 1937, though, the government changed. It was deemed constitutional for the government to recognize labor organizations. FDR had to threaten to pack the court in order for it to happen. But it did happen, and they passed the National Labor Relations Act. Also, the Railway Labor Act. It was actually passed in 1932, but the reason why they were able to pass and make these pass constitutional muster was because of all of the violence. After that period, labor organization was pretty fair, and we saw a peak in 1954 of labor organization. It was 35%. This scared capitalists. Before that peak, they passed Taft-Hartley, which made labor organizing tougher, and it also made it so that states could pass right to work for less laws. These right to work for less laws were passed mostly in southern slave states, what had been pre-Civil War period southern slave states. After people sometimes ask me, well, what about the period between the Civil War where we didn't have slaves and before Taft-Hartley? And during that period, they had sharecropping. Also, lately we've seen, since 1979, we've seen an extreme growth in anti-organization tactics. This includes a lot of propaganda. For example, when you go to get a job at Walmart, that you will be shown many videos about how terrible labor unions are. They will use illegal tactics, and the punishments are fines that are deemed a cost of business. It's cheaper to pay the fines than it is to allow the union. So that's what they do. The question is, well, aren't we poor? No, this country is not poor. This country is richer today than it was yesterday. Yesterday it was richer than the day before, and it has been for a very long time. That we can see here in this graph, the efficiency of the American workers has gotten better and better, but the profits of that have gone to the rich and the capitalist class. We can pass the Employee Free Choice Act, which would make labor organizing much easier. We can repeal Taft-Hartley. We can raise the minimum wage. And because of mechanization, we're losing jobs. The way to get the jobs back is to make full-time fewer hours and to increase full-time pay to more than just time and a half. Today, what we see is many employers are deciding to go ahead and pay the time and a half and have somebody work 60 hours. I know that I did at UPS. Have somebody, because of the other costs besides just wages, it makes sense financially for these companies. Seeing as our policy of overtime is not doing its designated job, which is to create jobs, then we need to tweak the public policy and increase overtime to even 2 times or higher, such that it works, to where companies decide that it's a better idea to hire people than it is to pay overtime. We could have a progressive income tax with transfer payments. We also could have new tax brackets for the higher incomes. We've had an extreme growth in extremely high incomes. There was a fellow, he bet against the U.S. economy in 2007. He made $5-6 billion off the crash and that bet. He should not be paying the same tax rate as the neurosurgeon that made $900,000 that was doing a lot of brain surgery. That doesn't make any sense. His income is so much higher. It should have a new bracket. We also could have universal health care. Universal health care also would make small businesses a lot more viable. It's a significant cost for them in order to provide health. It was a mistake to make health insurance something that was provided by businesses in the first place a long time ago. It's a design that no other country in the Western industrialized world has anymore, and it should stop. We can have universal secondary education, and there's all kinds of other policies that we can take where we provide better services to the poor if we're not going to have transfer payments. Thank you very much for allowing me to monopolize your time. I really appreciate it, and I would like all of the questions anybody would have.
very nice talk.
Go ahead and line up on the cue board if for anybody with questions. If you want to do them in voice, and then Johnky can choose which ones you'd like to answer first.
Hello, I was wondering, what do you think of a flat tax?
The progressive income tax that we have is the only progressive sort of tax that we have today. A flat tax would not work as far as improving income inequality. A flat tax, unless you were to make that flat tax a fairly high tax, but exempt a very large portion of somebody's first amounts of income. If you were to say, okay, everything over 100 grand that you make, you pay this flat tax on, that might work a little bit better than our current system. But the progressive tax system that we have today, it is the only progressive tax we have. It's the only good tax we have as far as improving income inequality.